Manhattan, New York. It was exactly 2:47 p.m. on Saturday, October 10, 1964, when Mae Johnson and her daughter Ruthie stepped through the polished brass and glass doors of Bergman and Sterling. The air inside the Fifth Avenue boutique smelled of expensive French perfume and imported silk, a sanctuary for Manhattan's ultra-wealthy that had only recently, and quite reluctantly, opened its doors to black patrons following the Civil Rights Act. Mae, 58, carried herself with the poise of a queen in a tailored navy suit, her pearl earrings catching the light as she adjusted her leather handbag. Beside her, 29-year-old Ruthie was the picture of mid-century elegance in a cream-colored dress and pristine white gloves. They moved through the aisles with a confident ease that suggested they weren't just there to browse. They were there to buy. A young sales clerk approached them, her smile tight and professional, masking the visible nerves common in an era where courtesy toward black customers was a brand new, legally mandated requirement. For 15 minutes they were treated with a fragile, practiced politeness, examining the full collection's finest evening wear, while the eyes of New York's white elite watched them from behind racks of designer gowns, unaware of the storm that was about to break. If you're captivated by this story of power and justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Tell us in the comments what part of the world you are watching from, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. The fragile peace of the boutique was shattered at exactly 3:02 p.m. when the heavy glass doors swung open for Charles Peton III, the real estate mogul, a man whose $45 million empire was built on a foundation of exclusion, stopped dead in his tracks the moment he spotted Mae and Ruthie near the evening wear. Witnesses described his reaction as instantaneous and volcanic. His face flushed a deep bruised purple as he bypassed the clerks and lunged toward the women. Without a word of greeting, he unleashed a torrent of racial slurs so vile they seemed to physically vibrate the air of the quiet store. "This isn't your neighborhood," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as he grabbed a $650 French silk gown Ruthie had been admiring. In a final theatrical act of contempt, he hurled the delicate fabric onto the floor and ground his heel into it, shouting that the merchandise was now contaminated and unfit for white society. As Ruthie's eyes filled with tears and Mae stood in a frozen, dignified silence, Peton stood over them like a monster from a dying era, completely unaware that his 5 minutes of hate had just triggered a countdown to his own professional and financial execution. The drive back to Harlem was a suffocating tunnel of silence, the luxury of the Cadillac feeling like a cage as Ruthie's quiet sobs filled the back seat. When they finally entered the brownstone on 120th Street, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, was sitting in his leather armchair, a newspaper folded neatly on his lap. He didn't interrupt as Mae recounted the afternoon, describing the silk gown on the floor and the venom in Peton's voice. Bumpy remained deathly still, his dark eyes fixed on a point in the distance, absorbing every detail of his family's humiliation. He didn't reach for a weapon, and he didn't raise his voice. Instead, a terrifying, surgical calm settled over him. He stood up slowly, kissed Ruthie on the forehead, and looked at his wife with a clarity that signaled the end of the grieving and the beginning of the war. "Go upstairs and rest," he said, his voice a low, melodic rasp that carried the weight of a death sentence. "I'll handle it." In that moment, the loving husband vanished, replaced by the master strategist who had survived Alcatraz and conquered the streets. The time for emotion had passed. The time for a 72-hour masterclass in total destruction had begun. By sunset, Bumpy Johnson had transformed his private study into a silent war room. He didn't reach for a pistol or call his enforcers. Instead, he picked up the telephone, using the receiver like a precision-guided weapon. Over the next 4 hours, Bumpy made 20 strategic calls to contacts who sat in the shadows of the city's financial district, men who owed him favors from the days before his stretch in Alcatraz. With surgical focus, he mapped out every brick and beam of Charles Peton's $45 million empire. He didn't just want to know what Peton owned, he wanted to know what Peton owed. By midnight, the reconnaissance was complete. He discovered that the Mogul's invincible fortune was a house of cards, built on a foundation of massive high-interest loans and highly leveraged midtown properties. Peton wasn't just wealthy, he was vulnerable. He was a man who stayed afloat only because the banks allowed him to. Bumpy stared at the notes on his desk with a predatory satisfaction. He had found the jugular. Peton thought he was a king, but Bumpy had just discovered that the king was broke and the bill was about to come due. Monday morning arrived with the cold precision of a sharpened blade. While Charles Peton III sat in his mahogany-paneled office, oblivious to the clock, Bumpy Johnson's invisible army began to move. Strategically placed intermediaries, refined men with law degrees and Ivy League accents, descended upon the three banks where Peton's empire was most vulnerable. They didn't mention Harlem or revenge. Instead, they presented risk assessment dossiers that framed Peton's public outburst as a catastrophic liability. In the sensitive climate of 1964, they argued that Peton was no longer a stable tycoon, but a PR nightmare whose toxic racism threatened the bank's own reputations and federal compliance. By noon, the pressure reached a breaking point. The lenders, gripped by a sudden manufactured panic, issued formal notices for the immediate review and call of over $9 million in outstanding short-term loans. The financial guillotine had dropped. Peton, who had spent decades looking down on others, suddenly found himself staring at a ledger of ruin, realizing too late that the same system he used to exclude others was now being used to erase him. While the bank squeezed Peton from above, Bumpy Johnson activated the power of the pavement from below. He didn't send men with baseball bats. He sent men with megaphones and moral authority. Using a series of untraceable community grants, Bumpy funneled thousands of dollars into the local chapters of CORE and the MACP, providing the resources for an overnight mobilization. By Tuesday morning, Charles Peton woke up to a city that had turned into a mirror of his own ugliness. Hundreds of disciplined protesters surrounded his flagship midtown buildings, forming human chains that choked the entrances. They carried professionally printed flyers that detailed his volcanic outburst at Bergman and Sterling, quoting his slurs verbatim for every tenant and passerby to read. The air was thick with chants for justice as Bumpy's influence orchestrated a massive, coordinated rent strike across Peton's 19 properties. For the first time in his life, the Mogul found himself a prisoner inside his own empire. Watching from his penthouse window as the undesirables he had spent a lifetime looking down upon became the very force that would ensure his total collapse. By Wednesday morning, the air in Manhattan's high society corridors had turned ice cold for Charles Peton III. In the world of the 1960s elite, power was as much about access as it was about capital, and Bumpy Johnson had ensured that Peton's access was officially revoked. The headlines detailing his public meltdown at Bergman and Sterling had transformed him from a respected mogul into a toxic liability. Phone calls went unreturned, and the silence from his social circle was deafening. By noon, the boards of the two exclusive country clubs he had helped lead issued formal notices of his expulsion, citing conduct unbecoming of a member. His name was systematically struck from every prestigious guest list from the Upper East Side to Wall Street. The very people who had shared his prejudices just weeks earlier now scurried to distance themselves, fearing that his crude and public display would draw the ire of the federal regulators and the growing civil rights movement. Peton found himself in a peculiar kind of purgatory, still standing in a penthouse, but socially invisible. A man whose presence had become a contamination to the very society he once ruled. By Wednesday afternoon, the once impeccable office of Charles Peton III was a tomb of shattered glass and frantic telegrams. Peton sat behind his desk, unshaven and trembling, his $45 million empire having evaporated in less than 3 business days. The door opened without a knock, and in walked Theodore Green, a man whose tailored suit and calm demeanor radiated the quiet authority of Harlem's legal elite. He didn't offer a hand or a word of sympathy. He simply placed a single business card on the desk. "You spent 72 hours looking for a financial reason for your ruin," Green said, his voice as cold as a winter morning. "But your problem isn't the banks, the protesters, or the clubs. Your problem is that on Saturday afternoon, you forgot your manners at Bergman and Sterling." As Peton's eyes widened in realization, Green leaned in closer. "The women you humiliated are the family of Ellsworth Johnson. Bumpy wanted me to tell you that in the new New York, respect is no longer optional. It's the price of your survival. You chose not to pay it, so he decided to take everything else instead." Exactly 1 week after the world of Charles Peton III turned to ash, the brass and glass doors of Bergman and Sterling opened once more for May and Ruthie Johnson. The atmosphere in the boutique had undergone a seismic shift. The nervous hesitation of the previous Saturday was replaced by an almost frantic, elaborate courtesy. As they stepped onto the plush carpet, the store manager personally greeted them, bowing slightly as he escorted them to a private viewing area. For 90 minutes the women shopped with the unhurried grace of victors, surrounded by white patrons who now watched them with a mix of awe and newfound caution. Every gown was presented with reverence, and every request was met with a chorus of, "Yes, Madame." Outside, the echoes of Peton's ruin still vibrated through the streets, serving as a silent warning to any who clung to the old ways. When May and Ruthie finally emerged onto Fifth Avenue, their hands full of elegant packages, they didn't just carry clothes, they carried the proof that the rules of New York had changed forever. Bumpy Johnson had promised to handle it, and in the silence of his strategic victory, he had turned a moment of humiliation into a permanent monument of respect.